Greetings, everyone. Gleekon here again with another episode of Lore of Warcraft. We recently finished an episode of The Last Guardian, a chapter where Medivh revealed to Khadgar that he was the Guardian. And then they're doing a sort of murder mystery thing where Medivh seems a little sus, and he's claiming it was demons, and he brought back some demon heads, and he doesn't feel very good, so they're going home now. I've been trying my best to kind of look through between that book to some extent and this Chronicles and the different missions on the orcs and humans and figure out exactly how we're going to run these levels. To some extent, it's an exercise in futility because for the first game, Warcraft, orcs and humans, to a great extent, to a lesser extent, Warcraft 2, and to an even lesser extent as you go on into Warcraft 3. A lot of the history has been retconned. So some of the things that are, because first of all, in orcs and humans, and again in Warcraft 2, you have mutually exclusive contradictory campaigns. You have orcs versus humans, and in their respective scenarios, they each win the war, and obviously that can't happen. So there are various events that occur that just don't happen. There are some that are just never mentioned. They're not contradicting anything. Those bother me less because whatever, we can just assume they could easily have happened. They could easily have never happened. It doesn't really matter because they have no lasting impact. And then there are certain things that are considered canon. So I'm just going to try my best. What I'm going to do is, after we do this episode and the next one of Chronicles, which don't spoil us anything further, I'm just going to push forward in the game until I feel that I'm hitting up against levels that are explicitly talked about in Chronicles, and then I'll go back and so the order of events that happens in Chronicles might not quite mesh up. We're talking about a war that lasts about 3 years, but there's no stated events that happen in year 2. So you have a little bit happening in year 1, a blank period, and then certain things that happen in year 2. Then there are a lot of big events that happen in the game that just don't seem to happen. So that's what I'm gonna do. After this episode and the next one, we're gonna push forward in The Last Guardian as far as we can. I might decide to throw a couple other episodes of Chronicles in there just because it's real vague at this point. We know Chronicles just keeps talking about there are interactions, there are battles. Nothing major. So until we start having named events, I'm not that worried about it. But we're getting there. We're really close. I'm just trying to kind of box us in as much as we can. So stay a little while and listen to this one. This episode is called Specters and Shadows, and I believe that it is going to lead us into some things that are going to happen soon in the Last Guardian book. Not long after arriving in Karazhan, Khadgar received a strange and foreboding vision. He saw himself as an old white-haired man leading troops into battle against green-skinned enemies. He had heard of the orc incursion, but like most others, he didn't know what was true and what was rumor. Yet those creatures in his vision matched the descriptions of orcs that he'd heard. And we saw that happen already in the book. Khadgar told Medivh what he had seen. The Guardian feigned ignorance, saying he knew little about the orcs. He claimed that he had been cooped up in Karazhan for so long that he hadn't heard much about the violence to the south. It was time to remedy that. The two magi rode griffins over the black morass to scout out the region. The sight of the orcs gathering there stunned Khadgar. Their army was immense, and it was growing larger by the minute. That part's mostly true, except for the feint here. This right here, they're emphasizing the ignorance that Medivh is feigning. He didn't really even have to in the book. He was superior. He didn't really explain it. An orc warlock spotted the two magi from the ground and unleashed his fell powers upon them. Medivh urged Khadgar to destroy their enemy. Khadgar struggled to defeat his foe, and only with the Guardian's help did he finally succeed. It happened. Medivh and Khadgar also crossed paths with Lothar. The knight was leading his soldiers on a scouting mission in the region, battling any orcs they came across. Lothar knew that Medivh had been rattled by the power he'd unleashed against the Gurubashi years ago, but he urged the Guardian to rejoin the fray. Stormwind needed him to defeat the orcs. Medivh played along with his old friend's assumptions, telling Lothar he was concerned about tapping into his unwieldy magical powers. The Guardian's true motive was to buy time for the Horde to gain strength, nothing more. Okay, again, that isn't got into as much detail in The Last Guardian. Doesn't necessarily, again, mean it doesn't happen. Also, other than that, it's pretty spot on. And this could be, like I said, those could still be describing the very, very, very first levels of the game. Lothar spoke to Khadgar as well, telling him of Medivh's troubled past. He asked the young mage to act not only as his master's apprentice, but also as his caretaker. Exactly in the book. That's what we just read. Khadgar did his best, but he quickly became frustrated. After the meeting with Lothar, Medivh became even more erratic than usual. For hours or days at a time, the Guardian would disappear from Karazhan. When he finally returned, he would be exhausted. Okay, so we're in the midst of that. We've seen some of that, and that's, I think, where we're going next in the book. What troubled Khadgar even more was when a strange guest arrived at the tower, Garona. The young mage immediately regarded her as an enemy, but Medivh greeted her warmly. He insisted that Khadgar treat Garona with respect. In the days that followed, Khadgar and Garona frequently sparred with words, but they soon developed a bond of friendship. The human came to believe, as Medivh did, that the half-orc was truly willing to turn her back on the Horde. That is something that I would like to get to in the book before we play the game. But you see, this is also why I've had a hard time parsing what I do with the book, because we are covering, I don't know, a third to a half of the book in this one blurb. Yet Khadgar eventually realized something deeply troubling. Before their visit to the Black Morass, the Guardian had claimed he didn't know much about the invading orcs, and yet it was clear he had befriended Garona long before Khadgar began his apprenticeship. Medivh had lied. That small breach of trust would widen over time. Okay. So he's realizing that he's not to really be trusted. I don't think he's quite there yet in the book that we're reading. But I think this is going to push us. We may even finish the entirety of The Last Guardian before we get to the games, depending on the pace that it goes. I'm not sure. And they give us a pretty neat picture here. That looks like Khadgar. The twisted reality of Karazhan. But it could be any. It could be Medivh. It could be Moros. It doesn't look like Medivh. It does look like Khadgar, but Khadgar is supposed to be youthful. That makes him look a little bit older than he is at the time. He's supposed to be a 17-year-old. It's a pretty cool picture, though, with the spell books and the illusions and magic swirling all around it. Pretty neat picture. Okay, so we're going to do one more on our next episode, and then we'll hop back into the novel. All right, this episode's in the pipes, 5x5. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you on the next episode of Lore of Warcraft.